my pleasure to welcome all of you back for the 2016-17 academic year. I hope you all had an enjoyable, productive, but also relaxing summer. Unlike last year, I don't really have a travel story to share with you. In fact, I was so exhausted by the travel that I took last year, I needed this summer to recover from it. But I did go to the Cape for the first time, and when I tell people that, they look at me as if I were telling them I'd never been to the post office. I think everyone but I had been to the Cape or goes there regularly. It was a nice experience. Anyway, I want to spend a little time with you this afternoon looking back ever so briefly, but kind of looking forward. I very deliberately titled my talk Planning for the Next Decade of Student Success. The implication being that we've had a pretty phenomenal decade of success since 2006 to now. You've heard the big statistic. I think it says volumes. It's the 57%, the 17% increase in the graduation rate. I think is probably our most noteworthy accomplishment because it involves so much more. It's a small statistic, but it involves a tremendous rethinking of what it takes to help students be successful. During that same time, you may not realize it, but the graduation rate for African American students increased from 32 to 42%. And during that same time, the graduation rate for Latino students increased from 33 to 49.5 last year. So there's still an achievement gap to be addressed, but this is one of those where the rising tide floats all boats. Everyone's performance has improved. But this decade, or the beginning of this new decade, finds the institution at a very different place than it found itself 10 years ago. And I want to start by looking at what I would call a volatile operating environment. I saw an interesting article the other day. I don't know if any of you saw it, little piece it was in the Hartford Courant, but it was written by a reporter from the Chicago Tribune, and it was called Degrees Over Diplomas. And what was significant is that for the first time in American history, there were more people in the workforce with some higher education credential than there were students with diplomas. And this is just kind of illustrates it. Of the 11.6 million jobs that have been created since the recession, 11.5 million of them require some kind of education beyond high school. And of the jobs that were lost, 5.6 million of the 7.2 million lost were held by workers with high school diplomas or less. So what that means is that opportunities in the future are going to be for students who are educated by us and institutions by us. We need to educate more students. Another significant change that's occurred is that we are no longer educating the same group of students. You saw the statistic that the president shared this morning from 17 to 31% minority. Here are some other statistics that he didn't mention, but that are equally relevant. When I started, there were 16% of our students, I think, were first generation. 37% of them are now first generation. And 27% of our incoming students are low-income students. We are also facing a period of, I don't want to say unprecedented, but of significant economic uncertainty. I don't know if this information is shared with you, but at this moment, our enrollment is slightly down. It's been up for the last 2 years, but this year it's down, and whenever our enrollment dips, we lose the revenue from tuition. Approximately $1 million is lost for every 1% of students that we go down. And since we are part of a general fund allocation in the system, it's a 3-year rolling average, but if our numbers are down relative to our peer institutions, our share of the general fund allocation will also go down. So keeping enrollments up is obviously something that we need to focus on assiduously, especially this year when, though we are down, all the other CSUs are up. And we need to understand what they're doing, what they've done in the past year that we didn't do. The state gives us a certain amount of funding for financial aid, governor's scholarships, just another little indicator. That number is down 23% this year from what it was last year. And with the year starting, we have taken already, the governor still has the authority to do his 5% budget rescission during the year if he needs to, but he has already taken, we start the year with a $2.7 million rescission. Actually, the budget picture for this year looks pretty good. That should take care of it. The latest projections say that the state at the end of 17 should have a tiny surplus of maybe 200,000. Very modest when you think about the size of the state's budget. But over the next 3 years, the numbers that were released yesterday anticipate or project a deficit of over 700, or an average 700 million for the next 3 years, 18, 19, and 20. Okay? So those are our circumstances. That's the context in which we are going to operate. I know I'm starting with some gloomy news. I'm not going to end on a gloomy note. I believe that we can thrive in this environment, but I believe there are things that we need to do in order to make that happen. And boy, are we at the right time to be doing it, right? To be rethinking, well, what are we going to do next? How are we going to have to change if we're going to be successful in the future? Obviously, we're going to have a major change in the appointment of a new president, possibly as soon as October 20th, I think is the projected appointment date. The strategic plan that we now have was written almost a decade ago. And I think that this will be a good time for a new president, but also for this entire community to take a hard look at that document and to say, have our priorities changed? Do we still have the same goals that we did before? Can we still afford to do all the things that we invested in the past? And this also coincides with probably the most significant soul searching that an institution like ours ever has to do. We are about to embark on our 2-year lead up to the fall 2018 NEASC campus visit. So we've already appointed standards teams. We're having a meeting on Friday. We're going to start cranking out a self-study. And over the next 2 years, you're going to be participating in open forums. And what, excuse me, what the NEASC self-study asks us to do is to describe what we're currently doing, to take a hard look at how well we are doing what we are currently doing, and then to make projections about how we can improve on the way we are doing things. So, with that as the context, I want to devote the rest of this conversation to thinking about what it might take to plan for another decade of student success. And I would think the first thing that we need to do, and when I say we, I mean that very deliberately, and I hope that'll be clearer by the time that I'm done with this presentation. We collectively as an institution have to agree on what are our top priorities. Why are we in business? And the reason I think we have to ask that question is because if we have to make choices about what we can and can't do, we need to agree that yes, this is good, yes, this is good, yes, this is good, but if we can't afford to do it all, we must be sure to continue doing this. And I want to suggest, this is not, I don't make this decision, but I'm sharing my perspective as an academic administrator and someone who's been at this institution for a long time. I believe that our highest priority is to help our students succeed. And I also believe that we need to be thinking about what are the skills, knowledge, and attributes that we want our students to have if we want them to be engaged citizens and successful professionals. So if those are our priorities, then I think the question we have to ask ourselves is what can we do to help more of them succeed? And what are the characteristics of that we want a CCSU graduate to have? And what are we going to have to do to ensure that they embody those characteristics? Now, at the same time that we are having this conversation, I think it's important to be aware that we are not the only ones who are having this conversation or who are having to make these kinds of decisions. What we are doing is happening to higher, or what we need to do, and the challenges that we face are being faced by institutions of higher education all over the country. For those of you who look at the Chronicle of Higher Education, big prominent article about Illinois. Here is a state that has not provided any permanent funding for higher education for 1 year. One institution in Chicago literally asked employees in the middle of the year to give them their keys. So a lot of institutions are saying we are facing declining support from our legislatures. What can we do to continue delivering our mission in that kind of environment? And there are other institutions that are doing it. I'm giving an example from Dave Dowell was the provost. He's the retired provost at Cal State Long Beach. And here's how they addressed this question of what are our priorities. And I just like the way he framed it. He said, once you say what's best for students, all kinds of questions are off the table. Things that are not in the best interests of students are things that we are not really concerned with. And these are the commitments that David Dowell and his faculty and staff made at Long Beach. They said that all filled classes will be funded. I'll give you another quote from Dowell that I thought was a kind of a takeaway. He says, if we can't deliver all, in caps, all the classes students need to make progress to degree, nothing else we do matters much. So he also believed that an important investment, and there is national research to support this, one of the best investments a university can make is to hire advisors. That may sound counterintuitive, but they provide guidance for students that students desperately need. So he committed that even when they were cutting budgets, they were going to add advisors, and they did. And they would continue to support student support programs. And here's why he did that. Here's another quote from Dowell. He said, it would be tragic from a historical equity point of view if higher education does not respond by raising its game to help more students succeed. And so the second set of quotes that I have are from a man named Tim Hall. He is the former president of Austin Peay University in Tennessee. Don't know if you follow the news, but that's one of the institutions that has most markedly increased its graduation rates and especially increased the graduation rates for its minority students, which are now surpassed those of the majority population. He's now president of Mercy College. So Tim Hall, who was up at his keynote last year at the National Symposium on Student Retention, he just expressed the opinion that student learning must be at the center of everything that we do. And he also said that we must believe that it really matters whether our students succeed. And I want to pause because he gave a particular example that some of you, most of us in higher ed, have heard before, whether it's true or not, right? Sometime, somewhere, some administrator looked at the students and said, look to your left, look to your right. At the end of the year, half of you are not going to be here. How many of you have heard that? Show of hands, have you heard that? Everybody, okay? Well, Tim Hall kind of took that statement to task and said, that's what this second one is about. We can't believe that half of our students are going to be gone at the end of the semester. We have to believe that it matters whether they succeed, and that it matters to us, to every single one of us. And that's the only way, collectively, that we can move this needle. So, if we want to move down a path of affirmed priorities or advancing our priorities, what are the kinds of things that we're going to need to do institutionally? These are kind of broad strokes, but the top one is a big one. You know, we need to make sure, we need to identify what are the things that are going to move our priorities, advance our priorities, and let's make sure that our funding goes there. If there's additional money, we'll use it for that, but we have to make sure that those things are funded. If we need to undergo changes, I mean, we're used to doing things exactly the same way for a long time, many of us. If we need to make changes in the way we spend our time at work, the institution needs to provide professional development to help us do that, to understand what more can we do to help students succeed. What are other successful institutions doing? Invest in mentors and advisors. I think that that's, as I indicated with the Long Beach example, that has been shown to be a key component of any student success agenda. We can no longer continue to function in silos. We're structured as silos. You've probably heard me say that, you know, the world has problems and universities have departments. And it does, it inhibits, I mean, like I have this meeting with the new faculty once a month, right? And I think it's one of those rare opportunities when faculty from different disciplines actually get to sit around the table and have a conversation with someone who isn't in their own department. And it's just the way the work is organized. But it's not just departments, it's academic and student affairs. And so, you know, Laura and I have been working closely together over the years, and I think that there's so much more that we can do with your help. And then the other thing that I think is really important that I see other institutions doing is we need to make sure that the people we bring into our institutions, that we invite into our environment, are the kind of people who are going to help us address our institutional priorities. I think that needs to be part of the litmus test. It can't just be how many articles have you published, you know, what's your degree in, what is your dissertation on. We've got to be thinking about, you know, how will you contribute to helping students succeed? Or in what ways have you been engaged in those efforts in the past? And I think, frankly, we need to do the same thing with the way that we evaluate ourselves. We've got to stop making decisions to keep people here as part of our culture because we think they're good colleagues, or they're nice to have around, or they're strong researchers. If they're not contributing, if they're not effective in promoting student success, we need to be, I think, more honest with ourselves about whether that's who we want for the long term. So, in addition to building institutional capacity, I think we've got to get out of our students' ways. So I think that's the first step we've got to take. I think we make our students' lives way more complicated for them than we realize. Students, and this, I'm sharing with you things that are not things that I just thought of. These are strategies that are being employed nationally. These are things that other administrators and other faculty at other institutions are saying, that we need to simplify the choices that we give students, that we overwhelm them with all these choices. And that's why degree maps, which we've done to an extent, but not nearly enough, is something that we should implement across the board. All programs should have degree maps. It doesn't mean that's the only way that a student can get through the program, but it's a way. If you do this, if you take this course, and this course, and this course, and this course, and these courses for the next 8 semesters, you will get out of here in 4 years. That'll satisfy it. And limiting the choice for doing that may not be a bad thing. You know, we may have subtle philosophical arguments about general education, about why we should have this and why we should have that and why we should. To students, you think, really? One from column A, one from column B, one from column C. I mean, I think that subtlety is lost on them. And I think that if we want them to be successful, we've got to be more mindful of how they're processing the information. Reconsider remedial placements. I mean, we're supposed to be doing that anyway with this PA, is it PA 1240? Yes. There's a lot of evidence that putting students into a college-bearing course that is aligned with a remedial course will produce just as much student success as if you make students take a wholly remedial course and then have them take a credit-bearing course. We have those. We have the combo course in math. We have 105 in English, but we still have the 099. And are those, do we need students to take? Or we should certainly try and see what would happen if we put more students in those combination courses to see whether we can experience the kind of success with that other institutions have. Reevaluate prerequisites and requirements that unnecessarily disadvantage students. Okay, you heard me say, some of you heard me say this last year, and it is one of my hobby horses, and it has to do with our math requirement. I have a problem with our math requirement because I believe that a lot of our students have a problem with our math requirement. We currently require students to take in general education, take 6 credits of math. But before you can take those 6 credits, you have to pass a course in college algebra, which you don't get general education credit for, but you get college credit for. So now the 6 credits have expanded to 9. Well, a lot of students aren't ready to do college algebra. So now you got to take 099 before you take the 101. Now you got 12 credits of math. We need to look seriously at what happens in those first 6 credits. This is, again, not just me. Every time I see something like this, I share it with Dean Malhas. I say, a lot of people are saying, not all college students need college algebra. And I think we need to have that conversation because you are the ones who control the curriculum that requires students to take all those courses. How many students have stumbled or fallen because they couldn't get out of college algebra? When a lot of people who are credible are saying that a course in quantitative reasoning or statistics could do just as well. And I have an interesting anecdotal piece to add to that. There have been some cases where a dean might have negotiated with the chair of the math department to allow a student to take those 6 credits of general education math without doing the college algebra. And the evidence is that they can pass those courses. They can pass the computer science course. They can pass the quantitative reasoning and statistics courses. Now, we're working on this, and it's a decision that the Senate is going to have to make, but I hope you'll think seriously about the human consequences of having a requirement like that for students who may never need that math again. Belatedly, I will apologize to anyone who is embarrassed by my sharing the DFW list of courses. I was sharing it to you as not mean-spirited. I wanted you to know that there were some courses that students were struggling with, and that some courses had very high rates of student failure. I'm not going to repost the list, but I think we need to be mindful of courses where our students struggle. We in departments need to pay attention to who's not passing what courses and in what percentage, and is it acceptable to have a 32% DFW rate on a course? 1 out of every 3 students doesn't get through it. What can we do to make that course make it possible for more students to be successful in it? And then the final one, this is a recommendation that I picked up from the Educational Advisory Board, but it kind of makes good sense, and we do this anyway. we need, I think as part of this planning for helping student success, we need to conduct an audit of our policies. We need to look at our policies, some of which we have just been sitting there for years and nobody pays much attention to, and see whether they are all conducive to student success or whether they pose undue challenges. I mean, we had some good success this year. I want to commend my colleague Charlene Casamenter for her receptiveness to changing the holds on student registrations. We've made some changes that have allowed more students who owe us small amounts of money to register, but that's an example of a policy that literally prevented a lot of students from enrolling in classes. So in addition to removing barriers, there are a number of strategies that are proven. You know, some of you are probably rolling your eyes because you've seen me put some of these up here every year for the last 5 years. They're still important. They're still important. There's not a thing up there that does not have a proven impact on student success. The early alert is probably the most valuable option we have, and we're making it easier to implement. Early on in your semester, you need to be looking out for students who are struggling for whatever reason, whether they're struggling academically or they're struggling emotionally or socially. All you have to do is fill out that form, give us a little bit of information. It'll be routed either to the Learning Center or it'll be routed to the Student Affairs Office, and they will follow up. This can be a critical first step in helping students. By the same token, you know, I know things have changed, and I don't know how widely these practices have been adopted, but I know that when I grew up in higher ed, we got 2 grades. We got a midterm and a final, and that was the way our evaluation of students was structured. We can't do that. Students have no sense of how they're doing in our classes, and they need to know. Using Blackboard, putting your grades on Blackboard so they can see them. Do it early, do it often. And we ask you, we don't ask you until midterm, but we ask you at midterm, do you have a midterm grade? Please send it in. These are simple things that you can do. I don't think we're going to go through a big, Senate requirement to do it. These are simple, powerful tools that we can use. Class attendance, I've mentioned this one for a while. I got on this hobby horse when I read a meta-analysis that looked at all of the research that had been done on student success, and the single most powerful predictor of student success, class attendance. I mean, maybe that's so obvious, but it makes a difference. And if you tell students it's important for them to be there, most students will go, and they will benefit from having done it. Now, this next one of the institutions that has had a tremendous amount of success, again, focusing on priorities. What are we going to do? Focus on a few key things. And what they've done is they have made, this is Cal State Dominguez Hills. I know it sounds sort of resort-like. Dominguez Hills is where they used to have Watts. Watts is where the rebellion was. That's where they founded Cal State Dominguez Hills. It was one of the most challenged, the most diverse campuses in this country, and they have made huge strides, largely through collaboration between academic and student affairs. But one of the changes they've made in their curriculum is to ensure that every student experiences 2 high-impact practices before they graduate. For those of you who are not up on the acronym, high-impact practices are those practices that engage students actively in their learning. Good examples: undergraduate research, study abroad, community engagement, learning communities are examples. And so we do some of these things, but what Dominguez Hills did is they made it part of the curriculum. And I think that's, I'm going to get to this a little bit later, but we do a lot of good things. I mean, I can point, to 50 people who are doing undergraduate research, or 300 that have done community engagement, or another 300 that have taken students on study abroad. But a lot of students don't have these experiences. And we know how powerful they are for the ones who do have those experiences. Summer Bridge program, same thing. Again, Cal State Dominguez, we have a Summer Bridge program. If you look at the results, very successful. It's successful in getting students into college level math and English, but it also equips them with powerful learning strategies that will help them be successful. We're tracking this carefully now and hope to have a better sense of what the long-term impact is, but it's very promising. But again, the numbers are minuscule. We do these programs for a handful of students. Cal State Dominguez Hill went from 200 to 1,200. You say, well, how do they afford it? Well, it's about reallocation and priorities. If we have things that we know work, that's where we should put the money. The next one, supplemental instruction. We do that in some pockets. Supplemental instruction, for those of you who don't know it, is one of the least expensive ways of helping students be successful. You're teaching a course, you identify a student who's really good in that course. You hire that student to provide supplemental instruction the next time the course is taught. Students take the course, they meet with that student after the class, and that student, one of their peers, helps them go through any problems. It's a very inexpensive way, and I would say for any course that is challenging for students, we ought to be doing supplemental instruction. Another place you should invest. And then finally, we already did this to an extent. One of the reasons I think that we had success over the past decade is because we eliminated what was often criticized as the runaround. Students never knew where to go. There was one place here, and you go there, you go here, you go there, you get referred to another place. We did consolidate all of our student support services in one place in Willard, and we're now redoing Willard de Loretto. And part of the plan is to have kind of a centerpiece for all of that, a new student success center. That as long as I'm provost, I'm going to keep pushing. I want that to be a priority. I've set aside money to hire a director. I think we have to do this. It's a place that's going to be a clearinghouse for all student support. It's a place where any student can go and get help and not have to wander around. And that center is going to provide mentoring, which has already been shown. We actually have a program going right now of peer mentors that is having off-the-charts successes with some of our students, and I want to see us scale that up. Okay, so something else that I believe we're going to need to do more intentionally is to ensure that we assess progress. I think this is something that faculty need to do in their own departments. I think we need to be very cognizant as members of departments of where our students are struggling. What are the bottleneck courses? I mean, look at these data. The data are readily available to you. Which are the courses in your major which it turns out students have to do really well in to succeed? They might be a key course. And are enough students succeeding in those courses? I think if you begin to look at the data and see the fault lines, you can begin to develop strategies to address them. I think we have to assess the impact of all interventions. I've been saying this for a year or two. Tell me what your projected learning outcomes are. Are you achieving those outcomes? What kind of success are you experiencing? Because if we're in a position where we cannot afford to do everything that we do, we have to be willing to defund programs that are not promoting student success and invest in programs that are promoting student success. And I want to say there can't be any sacred cows. Just because a program is popular with a small number of faculty or a small number of students, the institution or the institution's mission may not be able to afford it. I think we have to be willing, collectively, to take those hard looks. Look at the data and see if we can agree, yes, we need to make this choice. Study the impact of pedagogical and curricular innovations. As I said earlier, I think we need to invest more in professional development. And we need to encourage our faculty to become more mindful of what successful learning strategies are being implemented in other places. And encourage faculty to try new things, but also to pay attention to what happens. In other words, did this have an impact? What was it supposed to achieve? Why did I do this? Right? I mean, for example, I had a colleague at an institution where I worked before. She was in psychology, and she was not getting the kind of results that she wanted from her students on the big test. So she was doing a couple of sections of psychology, so she kept the big test, the midterm and the final, in one section, and in another section did weekly quizzes. And then stepped back at the end and found out that the students who did the weekly quizzes kept up with the reading more than the others did. There were all kinds of positive benefits. So it's that kind of thing. Try stuff, but take the time to see whether it works. And then finally, document student learning. I mean, when NEASC visited us a decade ago, they came down on us really hard for not having in place a mechanism for documenting student learning. I mean, they call it assessment. It's this dread term, right? That was 10 years ago. I mean, since that time, we've established an office of institutional research and assessment that's very competently staffed. We have a faculty senate assessment committee. We have a whole assessment protocol. But with NEASC coming in 2 years, last year, only 76% of our programs had submitted assessment reports. Fully a quarter of our departments are not doing this. At least they're not doing it in the way that the Senate agreed we would all do it. But the other thing is that we were not doing any assessment of general education. General education were these courses that we assigned, and it wasn't clear. I mean, I'm teaching a course, a gen ed course, so am I supposed to provide evidence that my students are meeting this, in my one course, meeting a gen ed requirement? So I want to give a shout out to a group of visionary, hardworking faculty and administrators, and I'm going to read their names because even if they're not here, I want you to know that they're doing this. Central is participating in what's called the Multi-States Collaborative. This is 9 states that are using an assessment measure that has been nationally validated. So they're using a tool that has meaning, and they are using it to look at students' written communication, their quantitative reasoning skills, and their critical thinking. This group of faculty met. Well, first, some of you probably heard this. You had a request for you to submit samples of student work that they could look at in this assessment. A lot of these faculty submitted work from their own classes and then spent 2 days, this past Monday and Tuesday. So, Abigail Adams, Kathy Barada, Cassandra Broadus Garcia, Linda Clark, Cheryl Crespi, Lisa Frank, Kim Costellas, Martha Cry, Carlos Liard Muriente, Jim Mulrooney, Paul Pedersen, Christina Robinson, Jason Snyder, and Deborah Zanella, along with Mel Horton, and biggest hat off to Yvonne Kirby, the director of the Office of Institutional Research and Assessment, for coordinating this whole thing. This may not even be on your radar. This is probably the work that is going to get us through this next NEASC. If they weren't doing this work, we would not have in place a way of showing what our students are learning. And as it turns out, they're learning quite a bit. We're doing very well, in fact, surpassing many of the other CSUs, but also students in the other 9 states, okay? And what's even more interesting is that yesterday, or Monday, the Chronicle of Higher Education sent a reporter, in other words, word of their success with this whole mechanism for assessing general education, had reached the Chronicle of Higher Education, and you'll probably be reading an article about their work in 2 or 3 weeks, so that's really exciting. But these are faculty here who are doing this. They are helping us document student learning. And it's so important. It's important to parents, it's important to employers, it's important to legislators who give us money. We need to be able to show what our students are learning. We can do this. Some of your colleagues are doing it now, and I hope that more people will commit to doing this kind of work. So I've been focusing mostly to this point on academic success. But I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to touch on some things that I mentioned last year, but that I want to build on. It's not only academic strategies or student support that determine student success. Now, I said last year, do we know, or I challenged you, I said, do we know who our students are? And in part, I was referencing the fact that there are, 31% of our students are minority, 37 are first generation, 27 low income, and how different their experiences of life are than those that many of us have had. Although some of us do come, or some of you do come from those kinds of background and know what I'm talking about. And the one that I want to pick up on, because I think it seems to have more traction than any of them. A lot of students leave college because they don't feel they belong here. They may come from a family that doesn't have any parents who went to college, and they're not sure that so they don't have any outside support mechanisms. They're not sure that they can be successful here. And those worries about belonging often have a self-fulfilling quality, what Jaeger calls exacerbation cycles. Let me quote from his remarks. He says, so this is a student, mindset. This is hard for me because I do not belong or am not smart enough. Therefore, I will isolate myself. I will not seek help. I will avoid other people who are on campus. I will study alone. I will have few friends, and as a result, a lot of these students have worse performance. And I think we ignore this at our peril. I think the second point from the Walton and Carr article, by the way, I've got a list of sources. Those of you who are interested in this and who are interested in the research that's behind it, that is what's so impressive. It is robust. This is not just touchy-feely stuff. These are conclusions that have been reached under numerous, extremely rigorous experimental circumstances. People have come up with some very ingenious experiments to confirm this, and it's been confirmed in so many ways. And what Walton and Carr mention is that if you have any misgivings about uncertainty, about belonging, if you have belonging uncertainty, as they call it, you tend to be more sensitive to cues that are going to confirm that. You sort of look at the world around you and you see things that either confirm that you belong there or things that confirm that you don't. The signs, the pictures on the wall, the people in your class, the people teaching your class, the way messages are framed on campus. Do they seem to include you, or do they confirm that, nope, you're not really the kind of student who belongs here? So I think we need to pay attention to that. And this second point, which also comes from the Walton and Carr article, is the way they framed it is that people with belonging uncertainty suffer from what Walton and Carr called negative stereotypes. And it's this fear that you are going to be judged as a member of a maligned group. someone who, like women aren't any good in math, right? So there's a generalization versus treated as an individual. There was a young woman in a math class does not want to be thought of as a young woman. She wants to be thought of as an individual who can do math. So they've done research they've looked at negative stereotypes about supposed intellectual abilities. Minorities don't do as well in college. So these are attitudes. These are ways that our students experience the institution. And I think we need to be mindful of that. I'll look in a minute at some of the ways we can address it. Then the other thing I want to mention is that I will talk a little bit more at the end about connecting to the university, but we also need to be aware of the fact that nearly 80% of our students are commuters who really are not interested in connecting to the university in the way that we want them all to do so. So we need to be aware of that. How do you deal with students? Do they simply not benefit from all the wonderful things that we have to offer? So here are just a few thoughts about how do we strengthen our students' experience of belonging. And I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to make a much more intentional institutional effort to reach out to those students and find out how they're experiencing the university. We can't just assume that everything is fine. I think we need to go out of our way to find out how fine things are or how much students need help. We need to know about problems that students are experiencing. So these are just some strategies. I remember Dean Malhas at a recent retreat said, yeah, we used to have pizza parties where we'd have students come and faculty. And I think if that became more a part of the culture where there is this, it's not just interaction in class, which is often just one way, interaction outside of class, reaching out to the students, trying to get an understanding of who they are. And then this social belonging intervention. So this is something that Walton and Carr were talking about. Sometimes little things that universities can do can make a huge difference. And so they devised this social belonging intervention that invites students in and presents them with an alternative way of thinking about this at the beginning. In other words, lets them know up front that we know a lot of you are going to experience a sense of not belonging here. But you need to keep that in perspective. It's part of a transition to college. And saying that, implementing that intervention, they found resulted in significant positive impact on minority college and women students, and it improves students' sense of belonging and connectedness to the institution. Last year I talked about a similar growth mindset intervention where students believe that their intellect is fixed once and for all, and if they're struggling in college, it's just because they're not smart enough and they can't get any smarter. Well, the growth mindset intervention, which they tried with a number of students, basically has students like them, who look like them, from backgrounds like theirs, who talk about how they doubted their abilities, but then who talk about how they overcame them and how they became successful. Those two little kinds of interventions, which we should be doing automatically for all of our students. And I think it's something we can just do. Places that have done it have seen tremendous success in bringing about connections to the institution. So let's talk a little bit about that. We have a new model for an FYE course that we're piloting right now. And I think one of the innovations of that new FYE model is that it sets aside, out of 1,000 points that students can get in the course, it sets aside 200 for participation in campus activities. I mean, that may not seem like much, but we know that the more engaged students are with the campus, the more involved they are in the life of the campus, the more we retain them, the more satisfied they are here. So we ought to be giving some thought, not just to what we're teaching our students, but also how can we help to connect them better to the institution? Are there things that you could do through your class that might encourage students to become more engaged? how can you become more engaged as faculty? Some of you are already very involved with chairing clubs, for student clubs. Being the faculty advisor for student clubs is one way to do it. There are probably ways that faculty can get involved with students on some of the community service activities. So I think there are ways that our faculty can support the co-curricular mission of the institution. For those students who are not connected here, we ought to consider reaching out to them. We could have, I mean, if we had faculty mentors who tried to establish connections even with students who aren't always here and able to attend events on campus. I think we need to be mindful of individuals who are coming into our institution. We need to be paying attention to who the new staff members are, who the new faculty members are. Have we welcomed them? Have we made them feel like they belong? Have we addressed their questions? Networks of support. The East Asian Center that Helena Badiano runs started having this welcoming reception for all East Asian students when they came to campus. And now the Latino Center does the same thing, and the Africana Center. So we need to help students find places where they can feel comfortable, where they can feel alone, where they can meet other people who care about them. And then finally, I think we need to pay more attention to maintaining active connections to students through social media. And I don't think that we as an institution do much of that. One of the theorists on student belonging, a man named Terrell Straythorn, cited the statistic in one of his talks that students spend 8 to 10 hours a day on their phones. It's the first thing. I mean, Michael from communication, a new faculty member, said, yeah, he confirmed that. He said it may even be more than that. He says the first thing they look at when they get up in the morning is the last thing they look at when they go to bed. They get their news there. They take selfies. They look for Pokemons. And so what that means is if they're plugged into that needs to be part of the way that we're communicating with them. They're used to getting messages instantly and constantly. And I don't think we're doing much of that. And so if a student, leaves an advisor's office where he or she talked about dropping a course, a text message that says, are you aware that students, who drop courses typically add some statistic about the impact it's going to have on their graduation date? And then this last quote, this was a study that was done. His name is Brandon Bustede, and he works for the Gallup Corporation. And what the Gallup Corporation looked at is that they tried to correlate how people experienced or felt in the workplace, like after they left college. And they found that people who reported being, quote, emotionally supported in college, they had a close relationship with a faculty member, they had a mentor, they were connected to an advisor, who felt emotionally supported in college were twice as likely to have a positive work experience. And this is national data. And they also found that in terms of general well-being, in other words, if we actually go the extra mile and take this seriously and try to support our students emotionally while they're there, they're probably going to have better lives when they leave us. So, who's going to do this? And that's kind of the note that I want to end on, right? I can't do this. The student support people can't do this. But I believe that we as a university can do this if we all agree that this is what we want to do. And you're my audience, so I'm fully aware that we can have all the interventions in the world, but if we don't have your buy-in, it's not going to happen. So I think we need to listen to you about, well, what are your misgivings about this? What are your concerns? What would it take to get you to take assessment seriously? For example, right? Because there is a lot of resistance to that. You think it's busy work, and you don't understand why we have to assess when you're already grading. Trust me, there's a difference. But it's those kinds of things. I think that those are the kinds of conversations that need to be part of this planning. What's it going to take to get everybody on the same page? And what kind of help do you need getting there? And if you're having to do something different to support this, if you have the opportunity to do something different, we need to adjust our reward and recognition structures to make sure that your work is valued and recognized. And so here's a quote from George Mahaffey. George Mahaffey is the Senior Vice President for the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, ASCU. He's been at this a long time. He's just come out with a pretty powerful article called Reimagining the First Year Experience. And they did a study, and yes, it takes leadership. I mean, if leadership is not supporting this, it's not going to happen. But the places where it's worked is a place where faculty and staff believe that their role is to help students become successful. So I want to end with a slide that that reflects an article that I read this week that just appeared in the Chronicle. It's a story about American University, which is comparable in size to Central. It has 13,000 students, and they were finding that their students' support services were not successful, that the offerings were confusing, their students were not reporting much satisfaction, so they decided to throw the whole thing out. They're completely dismantling their student support services, and they're reinventing the student experience. And what they've done is they've looked outside of higher education for some models of how this can be done. What are some successful models? And so they looked at the Cleveland Clinic, which is a very elite group of medical centers. And they found that, that in order to make the patient experience, so substitute student, right? In order to make the patient experience the focus of every employee, it needed to involve everyone, not just the doctors and nurses, so not just the administrators and the specialized advisors, but everyone, staff and faculty. And they looked at Wegmans, which is a high-end grocery chain, right? That talked about the importance of making each employee part of the effort to improve the organization. And so they have these regular meetings where they seek the input from the greatest number of thoughtful people in the organizations. So I'd say that we cannot achieve higher levels of student success by continuing to do the same things that we've done in the past. Our current practices have achieved positive results, but over 40% of the students who start here fail to graduate from CCSU. Pursuing institutional priorities may require changes in the work that individuals perform, changes in the way faculty teach, changes in the kind of research they pursue, changes in the way they engage with students outside of the classroom as coaches, mentors, advisors. To encourage this kind of work, our institutional culture may need to evolve to ensure that it is recognized and rewarded. This is not to suggest that we mandate changes in everyone's professional activity, but rather that our appreciation for what constitutes meaningful work may be sufficiently flexible to allow for new initiatives that advance our institutional priorities. I believe that if we are collectively willing to make the necessary choices and stay focused on advancing our institutional priorities, there's no reason why CCSU cannot experience another stellar decade of student success. Thank you. I don't know if you're as parched as I am. I got 5 bottles of water up here. Anybody need one? I was chided last year for not providing an opportunity for you to ask questions. I don't know that I have any answers. I just gave you my answers, but I would welcome, we have mics set up on the side, and we can certainly put mics in the middle. If there's anything you'd like to ask me or anything you'd like to say about what I've just shared with you. Can someone turn on the mic, please? Is there a button on the bottom? Here comes somebody who knows.
So I'm just curious, are you going to post this for us?
Yes. Thank you. This was videotaped, so I'll put it on my website, and I'll put the slides up there too. Thank you. Anything else you'd like to know or say? What's on your mind?
It was important for the faculty to be interested in student success. How do we know if we're interested in student success? How will we do it? What are the keys for student success? Is the faculty invested in student success? I would have answered yes to that question. Do you agree? Is that being measured somehow, whether or not faculty is interested in student success?
I mean, I'm inclined to agree with you, right? I'm perfectly willing to make the assumption that all of our faculty are interested in student success. So I don't know that we've actually, that could be part of the inquiry to try and determine, well, it's not just a question of whether they are, but what they mean by that. In other words, is it a course-based? Is it an individual sense of commitment? Is it part of a departmental commitment? Is it part of an institutional commitment? And so I have an institutional job, and I think that it's important that we all try to pull together in the same direction. And I don't want to presuppose what that direction is, but I'm hoping that we can find some common purpose. And once we can agree on that, that gives us a basis for making choices. I mean, in principle, that's what strategic planning is about, right? You set your priorities, right? And you only go for those things. I don't know how systematically that's happened, but I'm saying that we certainly need to re-examine the priorities that we identified 8 years ago, 10 years ago, and see whether they're still relevant, and whether, I think more important, can we still afford to do all of those things? I mean, not that they're not all good. And I think that's the problem, right? Is that we're not accustomed to making choices among things with relative merit. It's good, we'll do it. It's good, we'll do it. And I think that what I hope will happen is that we will identify a few things that we believe or we know from research, evidence at other places are in fact successful, and invest to scale them up. I mean, I think most of you are probably suffering from what I've heard called initiative fatigue. I mean, we try everything, right? But we don't do it systematically, and we don't scale it. It's typically a pilot program. I don't think we do as good a job of gauging the success of those programs, the ones that are successful, and investing more money in the ones that are, But I think those are the kinds of things that need to happen. I think a smaller number of well-funded, highly impactful interventions and practices is the way we're going to get where we want to be 10 years from now. And the reason I keep saying this about choices, don't forget that first slide. If this state is going to have, $700 million deficits for the next, 3 years, we're going to feel it. We're not going to have as much money. Now, there are other ways we can deal with it. We can bring in more students. And it's funny, I mentioned Tim Hall, this guy from Austin P. He gave an interesting rejoinder to faculty members. Faculty members always say, we need more faculty. We need more faculty. And so he commented in his speech, he says, retaining 4 students pays for 1 faculty position. Retain 4 students, you get your faculty. That's the key. If we can keep more students here, 40% of them are leaving. Can we move that number up? Can we go from, it's 57 this year. That was sort of a banner year. It's going to go down a little bit next year. It's just sort of, it's all dependent on how the class B4 did, and we just know that next year it's going to dip a little bit. It's not going to be bad, but it's not going to be 57. We want to get it at least to 60 and keep it there, right? Anyway, I don't know if that answered your question. Okay, all right. But I think it involves choices that we collectively make, priorities that we collectively embrace. And then we have a basis for making choices about what we're going to do and what we're not going to do, or what we can afford to do and not afford to do. Any other questions? Yes, Sharon.
I think I can talk loud enough as well.
I think the mic works.
Okay. I've been here for a very long time. Initiatives with faculty and advising and outreach, the reward factor for promotion and tenure does not always reward those things for new faculty or even continuing faculty. Has that changed as far as advising and being a club leader as an advisor for a faculty member as opposed to research only and teaching?
Well, again, it's not my decision to make. I think that if there is work that we want faculty to do that is institutionally meaningful, we need to seriously consider ways to support it. And you heard me say this last year, and it was controversial, but I stand by it. I think our conception of what it means to be a faculty member has not changed in a very long time. But universities and our student body have changed dramatically. We're no longer teaching the same students. They have totally different needs. And I think the point that I'm making about this decade, right? We went from 17 to 31% minority. To what extent have we adapted to that change? In what ways do we do our work differently because we have a more diverse student body? Are we any more culturally competent than we used to be? What efforts have we made to inculcate cultural competence in our faculty? What implications does that have for what you do in your class? And does it matter if you have students from backgrounds that sometimes make them uncertain about whether they even belong in your class? Does that have any implications for what you do? I would think it might, especially if you keep, here's a very kind of weird, a weird fact that it's technical and I can't explain it correctly, right? But this was an example of a research study that Walton and Carr reported on. And it had to do with negative stereotypes about women and math. And the experimental design was to create an environment where women felt that they were subject to that stereotype in that environment. And then they were asked to take a test. They studied her brain activity, the women's brain activity. And they found that the part of the brain that was engaged by that math test, which they failed badly, was not even the part of the brain that works on math. It was the part that processes negative emotions. I mean, they have it dramatically. So we may think that our students' emotions are kind of, they're just their business. It affects everything. And I don't think we can afford to ignore them. I mean, Mike Alfano, I want to give him a shout out. He's trying to get a center on social and emotional learning. It's going to be the bedrock of how we educate kids in the schools and how we train teachers. So we just can't we certainly can't continue just being lecturers who just tell students all the facts in our class that they need to know. We can't just go home and do our research that has nothing to do with any of this stuff. Or do service that consists only of, checking off the box. You served on a Senate committee. I mean, there's a lot of this stuff that is meaningful service that can really help a lot of students. That's what I hope you'll think about. Because it matters. Because it matters. All right, I've kept you long enough. Thank you.